Good afternoon. So early this morning, we heard former President Bill Clinton talking about the fact that we are seeing such thin borders and boundaries are likely to become permeable. I'll actually argue that those borders no longer exist. The world has changed and will continue to change. When we think about trade liberalization, so WTO, NAFTA, ASEAN, the European Community, the ability to disaggregate an entire supply chain in greater scale and reach of global companies. If you take the top 50 largest global companies worldwide, each one of them separately is bigger than an average country in Europe these days. We expect that by 2025, 6 out of the 10 largest and most promising economies are going to be countries that we now see as developing economies. I will argue that there are no longer boundaries, or there are too many boundaries, depending on how we look at the world. What that means is that leading organizations, leading companies these days implies an enormous amount of complexity. And if we translate that to the talent and labor market, then we're seeing some trends that are going to require top-notch leaders to be able to manage through. So we have a shrinking Western workforce, right? We have a competition and a war for talent that permeates the entire world. We have emerging markets talents growing, so now emerging economies produce and export talent. To give you an idea, Korea, over the last few years, produced on an annual basis more engineers than the entire pool of engineers in the United States. At the same time, these pools of workers are becoming more sophisticated, and we need to understand how even within organizations, we have segmentation of labor, we have specialization of work. It doesn't stop there. We have changing values and expectations in the newer generations. When I look at the things, the way I worked, and the things that I would or would not say as I started my career, the parameters and the criteria and the behaviors are completely different these days. As leaders, we have to adapt to that if we do want to retain top talent. We have a mobile workforce. Work can be done from wherever the person is. On one hand, that enables us to organize the workforce thinking about a global pool. On the other hand, it creates a much bigger mobility from one company to another. What that means is that we have war for talent on steroids, and it will require a great deal of leadership to deal with that. Now, what's also happening is that 2/3 of all major companies worldwide have replaced their CEO at least once since 1995. So just imagine the turnover at the top level of the organizations and the amount of disruption that that causes throughout organizations, whether they're public or private companies. Now, if we look forward, most companies will have to replace half of their top leaders every 5 years. What does that mean? That means that jobs are getting bigger because leaders are taking more and more responsibilities earlier in their career. However, the supply of well-developed talent, so people who can operate with all those diverse workforces that can cope and create change, that talent is getting smaller. When you look at the Saudi Arabia's workforce demographics, that will cause those trends to be even more acute here. So what do? Just imagine each and every one of you in this audience, if you had 6 years ago the same responsibilities that you have now. That's what our research shows, is that right now, managers and leaders take responsibilities 6 years earlier than they would have 10 years ago. How do we deal with that? We have to understand how to develop them faster. We have to understand how to develop ourselves faster. So what are the drivers of leadership success? In our research, as a company, we have 30 years of research of leadership development and talent. We identified 6 key drivers of leadership success. Well, intelligence. We don't see too many dumb CEOs, right? They're typically intelligent, so that's a box that you check right off the bat. Technical expertise. People move up because they're good at what they do in the first place. Motivational quotient. That's your ambition. That's your drive. That's what you see in your employees who really want to move forward. The experience quotient. Have been there, have done that, can do that again. The learning quotient. Now it gets more complicated because it is the ability to deal with new situations, to triangulate problems, to motivate people that the leader is not familiar with. And then the emotional quotient, ability to deal with ambiguity, tenacity, composure, empathy. Those are all required characteristics in successful leaders in the future. Now, if I ask you, 2 of those 6 quotients are the responsible for failure in leaders. They are the learning and the emotional, and they account, in our experience coaching senior executives and CEOs, for almost every disaster in organizations. So if you have to worry about just 2 to develop leaders under you in your organizations, think about learning agility and emotional agility. Here's the problem, is that people are generally promoted because they do what they do now really well. So promotions and development are typically based on current performance. The problem is that only 30% of high performers, what we call high professionals, are actually high potentials, meaning that are people who are going to reach to the top and who are going to be able to occupy different roles in the organization equally successfully. So that's mistake number 1, right? Number 2, we tend to look at how much accounting and economics the individual knows, how technically good that person is. Well, that's all ticket for admission. Let's talk about the 4 factors that really determine learning agility. The first one is mental. So it's your ability, when faced with a new problem, to go back and pull from your old experiences and solve that problem. People agility is high self-awareness, but it's also high awareness of others. Your Excellency was talking about how there is such an influx of foreign workers into the kingdom. Understanding what motivates people who come from different cultures, people who come from different backgrounds, is what people agility is all about. Change agility. It's not only the ability to effectively cope with change, but also to drive change, to see an opportunity and go for it. But nothing that matters, none of that matters if the individual is not laser focused on results and is able to, as some circumstance changes, some market characteristic changes, to very quickly reprioritize actions, reprioritize delegation to achieve similar results. So, as you move people from governmental roles into the private sector, as you try to find out who is your pool of high potentials within organizations, within corporations in the kingdom, understanding who are the learning agile individuals becomes even more important. Let me leave you with 2 pieces of research before we talk about how we do that, right? When we looked at what typical leaders are best at today, and we took the top 10 competencies for managers and executives, look at them. Very few of them fall into the learning agility buckets. However, when we look at what typical leaders are worst at today, just one of those competencies does not fall into one of the buckets of learning agility. So again, as you think about your own organizations, your own corporations, and the people who you're going to accelerate and retain in order to execute your growth strategy, think about assessing and evaluating them based on their learning agility and not how they performed in the past. And if I can leave you with only one message, most leaders are not born great, they learn how to be great. And it's up to you, it's up to us to develop those leaders. Thank you.